All right. Aloha, everyone. Today we have Joe Casava from Puzzles by Joe. Joe and I go way back. We used to live together in Atlanta. And he is the founder of Puzzles by Joe, an incredible franchise effect that he's going to talk about. Joe is nearly approaching $5 million in sales. He uses Unity full-time today, and we're going to be talking about his journey of how he got started with Clutter, as well as what he's doing today using the Unity engine and how it's kind of boosted his ability to produce games. So Joe, you want to just give me a quick background recap of what you do and what we're going to be, let's dive in.
Sure. A quick recap, and I'm going to try to get better at rambling in my recap. So in 2009, I was still working for iWin. I had done the Mahjong Quest trilogy for them. And that was at the boom of the casual market. And I decided to take off and try to do it myself. And I created a game called Clutter that I felt was just deep enough. It was a nonverbal hidden object game, basically. So you didn't have to read text and match stuff. You just matched two things. And I put my first Clutter game out, and it did just well enough to warrant a sequel. And I came so close to not doing the sequel, but I'm so glad I did. And we're, within 2 or 3 months now, we're going to release my 13th Clutter. And it's the first Clutter truly made for both PC and mobile at the same time. And we'll get into that later too. That's been interesting and so forth.
That's awesome.
But I think that's the gist of. You can ask more specific.
All right, good deal. Yeah. So just so we're clear, guys, if you're not familiar with Clutter, it's essentially like, if you remember those like kids books, right, where it's like I Spy and you have to find those elements. You're finding matching elements of Clutter, and basically, and if I'm mistaken, your market demographic is like an age group of like 65 and up. Is that right?
Well, we say over 40 with some, with some disposable income, mostly women, but it really does appeal to all ages. And I do see all ages giving me feedback and stuff like that.
Were you inspired by those books of like I Spy to create that?
No, I mean, I remember them. I did highlight magazines, when I was a kid, and I know what they were. But the hidden object genre became huge because of Big Fish and Mystery Case Files.
Right.
But I wanted to do something that appealed to that demographic without really being a hidden object game, which had high production values that were too high for me to sustain. So I love replayable things. I want randomly generated replayable things. So I took the words out and there's a thing called the hog pile that's just a bunch of objects, and you look and you find the two things that match. And that's the simple mechanic, but basically I've done that to death. And it's the variations of that basic mechanic that have kept me alive. And each game is new, but the same. I mean,
right.
There was a quote, I should have looked it up, from one of my customers that said, you know exactly what you're going to expect, and you get something different every time.
That's, what's really awesome about what you've done, right, is you've kind of, one, you're living the indie dream, right? We all want to be these game developers who make millions by themselves. But two, you created an interesting franchise effect that even like the top AAA companies can't even do. Like Call of Duty can't even do what you do, where someone today will play Clutter 12 or Clutter 13 in the future, and then they're going to go back and literally buy the past dozen games as well, right? How often do you say that happens for you, where people pick up one of your games and then they just buy the entire collection?
It happens enough. It happens enough. Every game that goes out, of course, adds to free advertising to the, games before it.
Yeah.
And, but I do see occasionally somebody who shows up, buys one of my games directly from me. In fact, they found my website. So they already played a game elsewhere, right? And they found my website. All of a sudden they buy one or two. And then a week later they buy a couple more. And they come back every 2-3 weeks, buying. So there are people that do that. Other people have been with me from the beginning, and they just can't wait. One big phenomenon is literally within 6 weeks of releasing a game, I'll get awesome game, when's the next one coming? That's what I get.
Yeah.
They just, it whets their appetite and they just,
right.
But I also hear from people that, hey, they still play Clutter 2, that's the game for whatever reason they like to go back to or something like that, or somebody else's number 5 is their favorite, or,
How many years ago did you release the first Clutter?
First Clutter released was February of 2011.
Okay, so we're talking 11 years ago you started this journey. So clearly,
well, no, 12. It took me a year to do that game. So
okay, a year to do the first game. So talk about creating that first game and releasing it. Were you full-time creating that first game? Did you quit your job to work on this game, or
yes,
did you
I
wait
did.
till after the release?
I did quit my job. I worked for iWin. The market had tightened up a bit, and they were learning that sequels were important. And they were learning that it was like a gold rush. Enough people go to it. And then all of a sudden you got a glut of games. And instead of your game staying up at the top of the charts for 3.5 months, you get a week, and well, if you spend $500,000 on a game, maybe you can't guarantee you're going to get it back. Right. So iWin, as well as some others, stopped in-house development. And I had a project called Diamonds that was halfway in production, and 2 other games failed, and they pulled the plug on my Diamonds. And that's, my wife turned to me and said, can you do this on your own? And I said, no, but I can do something. And that's when I decided to quit, and I took a year off and basically made the first Clutter in about a year, and put it out there and decided to see what it was going to do. So,
and what was the first distribution channel that you used for Clutter? Was it just your website?
Well, I knew it would get on. I knew it would get on at least Big Fish and iWin, and they were definitely the 2 biggest distributors I cared about at the time.
So you already had that partnership connection lined up to where you knew that they were going to accept your game.
Well, what I knew was that if it met certain criteria, they would put your game out and let the public sort of decide. And that criteria was it had to be at least 4 to 6 hours, had to be family friendly, had to run full screen as well as windowed, had to be professional looking enough, and even though I got reviews that said, looks like a student project, it definitely had enough gameplay. I knew it was going to go out. I thought it would get at least 100,000 eyeballs, and then the market would decide whether, I did okay.
And so this was only just on iWin at the time, or not? Yeah, iWin and Big Fish, right?
And Big Fish first, and then iWin.
Okay,
because
gotcha.
At the time, Big Fish had an exclusive thing where you had to be on their site for a month.
Gotcha.
To get the higher percentage.
Okay, gotcha. And so how did the first release do? Like from a revenue perspective, what was it?
Well, I thought I was going to make. I thought I'd make over 100,000 with it, or less than 10K because it bombed, and it proved me wrong. And in about the first 15 months, it only made about 50K.
Okay.
And 50K for a man year of my time was not good. And I came this close to just calling it quits and doing something else or picking another game. But I reasoned that I could do the sequel in half the time. And 50K for a half a man year was good.
Right.
I worked for a local gambling company doing slot math because I wanted to hedge my bet while I saw whether Clutter was going to do okay. So that second game took a little over a year to put out, but I really only spent 6 man months on it. And luckily, and I figured it would do about as well because if it wasn't a huge hit, right,
right,
it's more predictable, right? So turns out it did about the same as the first game, but it also bumped a bunch of sales to that first game.
Right. So it kind of started the concept of
correct.
Here.
And then I knew immediately I quit. I still hedged my bet. I was working 3 days a week for the gambling company. I cut them down to 1 day a week. I did Clutter 3, and Clutter 3 did better than 1 and 2 combined while still bumping sales to 1 and 2. And the franchise effect was really
just continued.
Awesome.
That's amazing. Man, That is cool. So let's talk about the tech stack. 12 years ago, Unity was around, but it wasn't like anything like it was today. How did you build the first Clutter? What was not just the first Clutter. You started using Unity just like, what, 2 years ago?
I started Unity in 2017, I think.
Okay. Oh, so like 5 years ago now. Okay. So
Yeah.
yeah. So what's the first Clutter that actually used Unity?
Clutter 1000, which is really the eighth Clutter.
Okay. Gotcha.
We talked while I was just
yeah, I remember that. You're just starting with Unity. Okay.
correct.
Gotcha.
And I put it off for a while because I run a local dev group that we meet up once a month.
Yeah.
And I was keeping my eye on, how much they complained about different things, right? About using Unity. And yeah. I had some people do some projects for me trying to get me ready to do it. And I was trying to get my own learning curve up before I really, took the plunge. And so I kept putting that off a little bit. I put it off for probably 2 years, but I finally decided Unity was stable enough. I ran into a kid whose code didn't make me cringe when I looked at it. And we did some pair programming that really helped me. It was like driver's ed, really. I don't think you can learn to drive a car by reading a manual, and I don't think you can learn Unity by reading a manual. And this was the right kid at the right time, a young adult, actually, I'll say. I mean, he was very sharp. And he took criticism of his code well, and he also taught me really how to jump around well.
Gotcha.
So I finally made the hurdle. But it took a year and 3 months or so to get that Clutter 1000 out, because at the same time I said, well, I'm doing this. Man, they deserve fresh objects. It's the same time I found this site called Shutterstock. Mm-hmm. And up until that point, I was using these old Chimera objects from 20 years ago. So I really hunted around for new object groups. I wanted the whole game to be fresh. So it took a year and a half. But the game after that started being 6 months. And I say 6 months, it's 6 to 8 months, as opposed to before it was a year to a year and 3 months, So.
Gotcha. Okay. So your development time using Unity is just shortened nearly in half. What was the tech stack?
And it'd be even shorter, except I always go, oh, wow, I can do this now. And the games are deeper, and
right.
There's much more to them because of doing things easy. So it's not quite like, I think I'm about 4 times faster in Unity.
Right,
but the games have about 2x, more in them.
Right.
Yeah,
I
put 2,100 puzzles in a game now. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. And so each puzzle is considered like a level, right?
Correct. And some of those are wheeled, like I'll have object sets and then types of puzzles. So I can get, 10 object sets and 10 different types of puzzles. That's 100 puzzles, right?
Okay, interesting. So I have some questions about the design of how you build those systems. Sure. So first, what was the tech stack you were using before Unity?
Oh, right. That was the original code. So when I left iWin, I made an agreement with them to stay on for 2 more months. I quit in November of 2009 and agreed to stay on before Jewel Quest 4 went out to help with that. With the exchange of, I got to use their framework, and they also got right of first refusal. So for 2 years, I had to show them what I did, and then they would go no, and then I could give it to other people. But I could use the framework I'd been used to for 5 years.
So, and what was that framework? That was the Mahjong framework, right?
Correct. Well, it was just called framework. It's set on top of SDL.
Okay, gotcha. So C++ at the time.
Correct. And definitely it was our own framework. And it originally existed, I think, in Java before they ported it over to Windows. Okay. And mostly done by the guy who did Jewel Quest. But I had spent 5 years really fine-tuning that and doing some slick stuff at the framework level, which one of the joys of Unity is I never have to work at that level anymore.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Because as much as it's fun, it's like, no, it's not where I want to spend the time anymore.
Yeah, right. No, you spend your time building things instead of building the things that let you build things.
Correct.
So let's move forward to your level designs, right? So you've got 100 levels now because of Unity's just easeability here. How are you making 100 levels of different cluttered images? Do you have a procedural generation system? Are you manually placing objects? How is the system for creating a level? And how
it's all data driven through like ini files. It's a pretty flat ini file thing. I can show you one if you want to see it.
Yeah, if you want to go and share your screen, you can show us what it looks like. I assume it's just like a table that has a bunch of IDs which are associated with
It's
images.
not a table, but I'm a Vim guy. It's all that. I'm going to try to do one little thing, DJ.
And then you said, did you just release on mobile?
I have a few things out in mobile.
Okay, nice. And how's mobile revenue doing for Clutter?
We can get into that in a second. First, let me finish with this.
Oh yeah, go ahead and pull that up.
Screen and just talk for a second. So it's this guy. So you can see that, right?
Yeah.
So basically, see the 101, the 106, 107, 109. Yep. Those are all levels. Okay. And within them, there's a certain level of indirection going, but these used to be, just to let you know, I mean, I constantly try to refactor myself, right? This used to be one line per, I didn't have the semicolon, believe it or not, for like three releases. So this used to be the old flat INI files, and it took me pages and pages. Now I can group things and, do some things. And even this doesn't quite show what, let's see if I can do it. Let's see if that worked. That did not work. Anyways, I'll just pop out of this. So what it doesn't show is I added concepts called like columns and rows, so I can really wheel something. So under columns, I'll have something that looks like I just showed, but it'll just say object set, it'll say set equals 1, set equals 5, those are the donuts, right, or the good, and under the other way, it'll say, 24 by 50 slide or 20, and it gives the other characteristics and then it wheels it. So then you've got, like I said, you've got 100 puzzles generated from really just 20 lines of text. And it's really, right, it's really just 10 object sets, which, is nothing to pick them. But I mean, it's not nothing. I mean, you still have to, a lot of it is trying not to ever give them a bad level, right? I mean, not all objects work with all Right, and right. That's the beauty of Clutter, is that they really never know what they're going to get on the next level. And there's a main quest that the whole purpose of it is either 100 puzzles or 144 puzzles. It's mainly walking through mostly the new variations, a lot of the old variations, and then hopefully when they're done the quest, they go back to the main menu and explore the 20 other areas that have these wheels and other variations that they can play, so they can find a variation they really like. They can even mark their favorites so that goes into an area and they can just play their favorites if they want.
That's pretty cool. So that INI file there, so
sure,
you're basically, so you that's a separate tooling application that you're just parsing from Unity, right?
I'm just reading in any file. Most people in Unity would use a JSON file.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I'm old school.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's the alternative right there. Because I think a lot of us, maybe many of us, have never seen what it looks like on there. It was like, yeah, that's dated. But okay, so instead of JSON, you're doing that, and right, okay, good deal. So let's talk about your mobile release. When did you release on mobile? And you could only do that because of Unity, right?
Correct. So a couple things is it's the old, when the student is ready, the master will show up. Mm-hmm. But it's also the notion of, if you stick around long enough, sort of good things happen to you in the space.
Right.
So about 3 years ago, I think I just put out maybe Clutter 9 or 10. And iWin came up, and they're trying to do an all-access mobile thing. So they asked to port Clutter 1000, my first Unity. And they just did a straight port because it's all access. They did not, it's not a free-to-play app. It's nothing like that.
Right.
And they actually ported free. It didn't cost me anything, 3 of the apps. And they did okay, but most of my customers didn't want to pay a subscription price,
right,
a monthly thing, just to do it. And they haven't grown that much. They've done okay. I don't know how well they're doing. But after they did Clutter 1008 and 9 and 10, Gamehouse came up to me and said, we'd like to do a port. They have a mobile space called, I think, Original Stories or something like that. And most of their games in their space, if not all of them, are time management games. And they decided they wanted Clutter to be their first non-time management game. And they also did the port, but this time it cost me. We split the cost of the port. And they made it a true mobile game where it has, you can buy it outright. It has in-app purchases where you buy things for about, so forth. But a very scaled down. There was no, pay for a hand. It's still scaled down, but there's still ad supported in-app purchases and buy outright. They could not figure out how to get enough downloads. It turned out the game had like 4 times, 5 times the engagement of their other games, but they didn't get the downloads. So it's only done fair. But it's done well enough that we've talked about who's porting Clutter 12.
Nice.
And I decided that I want to do Clutter 13 right. So I rescaled Clutter 13. Clutter 13 is my first game in 1820 by 18.
Are you thinking like HD 1920 by 1080?
No, it's not 1080. It's 1280 by 720. That's
okay,
what I picked. And I picked that for a couple of reasons, because then I didn't have to rescale my objects or worry about it. And it still looks gorgeous on a big full screen monitor. But it's the first game. Before that, all the games were 10. The first 2 were way back in 800 by 600. And other ones after that were 1024 by 768. So this is actually about 40% bigger playing field. It's gorgeous. And I redid the entire interface to make much bigger objects. I got rid of hover, the hover mechanic that I had for help and so forth. And I'm really, 13 is hopefully going to play super, super well on mobile. And I did more and more of getting rid of any thin objects, deciding this level doesn't even go in there because it's, it's fine with a mouse, but with your fingertip,
right.
I don't want that type of level. So I've actually re-geared the whole game to be much more mobile friendly. And there's not going to be much difference other than the, in-app purchase,
right. that
stuff. So
very cool. So 13 clutters. I mean, what is it that at this point in the franchise is, what's your motivation for continuing to make them? Is it purely, is it just the money, or do you genuinely, love these games, recognizing that
it is,
it's another question too of how are you innovating each project? Like other than just new objects to find, like what else can you do?
Well, there's tons, and I could take you through it if you really wanted to. I don't know what time it is, but
you're good on time. We got a half hour here.
So just quickly, and by the way, I went on my website, which I've retooled many, many times, and it's gone from selling about 3,000 a year to 12,000 a year. I have all the games listed in reverse order on the front, and I stole from friends. I wanted a one-word, the elevator description, right? I wanted the one. So it's the original one. It's the one with the dragging. It's the one with the void. It's the one, whatever, right? Yeah. And I named them all. Different things energize me. Okay. I was burnt out, after Clutter 5. And then I met these 2 young kids right out of school, really, that I decided to do a game with them and let them write the story and do the art, and I worked closely with them. And that game took longer. My best looking game, producers loved it. Didn't do as well. Did not do as well. My customers were used to Jonas by then, this weird quality called Jonas, and that game had less of it, and they
picked up on that. They're like, yeah, you did something different here and I don't like this.
So the next game became, I'm going to prove I can do Super Jonas and still do okay. Yeah. And I wrote Clutter 7, which is called Clutter Infinity. And I called it Clutter Infinity because it's 8 on its side, even though it's the 7th game, because I had already commissioned the artist and others. We already had a story for 7, and 7 was going to be this drop down ladder from an attic. It was Clutter 7 back to the attic. was the name of it. It's the
Right.
Lost Clutter. It's really, anyways, I talked about that in a later Clutter, but I called it Clutter Infinity, and it told the story of, this is the last one I did pre-Unity, of in one year snippet, or one little couple sentence snippets for each year of my life. It told the story of how I became the guy that ended up becoming the guy that created the Clutter games.
Interesting.
And it did well. It did better than 6. And I was like, oh, I'm unleashed. This is, I can
like
do anything.
New fired up energy.
If I'm true to Jonas, I'll be fine. So Clutter 1000 was the one with no text. And some people complained that there was no text, but it was all icon based. Mm-hmm. And the story was very much what connects us as human beings that's not language and tribal. And
so now interesting. So when you say story,
political at the time.
So when you say story, how are you telling a story through these games?
Almost pictures and snippets. It's a very unique, I don't think anybody else does it the way I do it. You basically, when you solve a level, you get a picture, you get a snippet of text, and you get a quote within the picture, usually. And sometimes I talk about the game a little bit, and sometimes I talk about what I want to talk about. Clutter 3 way back was the first time I tried something where I wanted to convince them that they'd rather play an ugly looking fun game than a gorgeous looking boring game. And that was Who's the Void. And that was my first foray into a little weirdness. And then, but over the years, that's the story. It's a picture, it's some snippets of text, and then you put it together. And there's either 144 puzzles in a quest or 100 or whatever, but like every 10 puzzles, the 10th puzzle is this thing that's usually a collage. And before you get to play it, you get to see all the pictures from the prior 9 you just played, and you get a snippet of text, and then you put it together and you get the point. Like for Clutter 13, it's called The Greatest Hits, which it's talking about music. It starts talking about music, and it ends with this sort of collage thing that has burnt in text of the words that are basically, 30 different musical forms, jazz, blues, so forth. But that's just the starting point of the story. In last game, the story was basically how you should leverage your time. When I leveraged my time as a kid, I thought, how can I do things that can improve my life in the future? And I called them lottery tickets of time. And I explained I took one of my talks that I gave, inspirational talks I give to the local dev community, and I sort of turned it into that game. And it was trying to prove to them that the more control you have over how you spend your time, that's very much connected to happiness.
Right.
And that's why like prison sucks, because you have no control over your time, and solitary is even worse because you have no control over your time, right? And that's one core of happiness. This game's actually, the story's all about, well, now it matters what you do with your time. And if you've spent your time wisely as a kid, then you've got all these things that in a sense you're addicted to, that you like, that was based on things. And I started thinking about how music affects my life, and ended up being Clutter's Greatest Hits, because when I realized plus the B-sides, the B is 1 and 3. And I've been known to do that stupid stuff in my game too, where the number of the game is hidden or weird or odd.
Right.
So the B in B-sides is the 13, the one in the
very cool. And so
anyways, it's all, so I'm writing the story right now, and it's hopefully, I'm 65 almost. It's in your old age when your body goes and it's just your mind. Are you left with regret, or are you playing your own greatest hits to yourself and enjoying, it's going to be I really don't know how it's going to finally end, because that happens a lot too. In the story, when I'm writing it, a lot of synchronicity happens, a lot of weird stuff. The last game ended with this picture, ended with to be continued.
Right.
And I looked around for this final picture for Clutter, I think. And I found this girl in the middle of just laundry clutter around her going like this. Can I swear, by the way?
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah. It looks like she's saying, what the fuck?
Right.
And I've never ended this, a clutter game with to be continued, right? So when I saw that picture, I went, oh, that's awesome, because I think she's going to have the reaction my players are going to have.
Interesting. So is this, okay, so let's talk about like approaching that kind of like society says retirement age, right? Like what's the plan for clutter in the future? Is there going to be a clutter 14, 15? Or?
Yeah, there's definitely going to be a clutter. Definitely going to be a clutter at least 15, at least 15, at least. By the way, Clutter 5, the story in Clutter 5 was, why the hell was I doing a Clutter 5 and will there be a Clutter 6? And I wanted to scare my customers into thinking that I might not do a Clutter 6. Around that time, I decided I was the curator of clutter, that I owe it in some way to the fans to put out a quality product that they like, because they've energized me. That whole last game was about how I invested the lottery tickets, but I kind of paid clutter. Clutter was both a ticket and kind of paid off.
Right.
And I really feel loyalty to my fans. It's very much a two-way street of how much I appreciate the fans. And it definitely gets in the game at times.
Approaching 5 million in revenue across the franchise. How many players is that have touched clutter?
So the way I look at it, it's tough to judge, but I would have to say there's at least 100,000 people that have played clutter, at least. But there's a lot of them have played more than one. In fact, on my website, I did a tracking. Something like 80% of people that have found my website, if they bought a game, have bought more than one game. Right. So that's what's really tough to judge. And I know I also haven't got real saturation. And, I really wish I could break the Steam problem. Because my games, there's 4 or 5 of them on Steam now with a producer who actually cares a little bit. And it's still so hard to reach an audience. But when I do reach somebody, they're freaked out by my games. They can't believe how much is in them.
Right.
And how different they are from what they're expecting from the Steam indie puzzle game.
Interesting. Now, Steam is your release for it from has it always been a downloadable desktop application?
What, Steam?
No. Your clutter game.
Mine, yeah. Started originally, it's always been a casual.
Gotcha.
PC.
Have you had any success on Steam? Having 5 of them on there? No. Okay. No. And why do you think that is?
Very minimum. And I will never do the work. But occasionally I get a publisher, and if I shove them stuff.
Steam. Gotcha.
And right now I have an indie guy who does well on his own. He's done okay, and he had a minor hit over there. And we're trying to see whether he whether the franchise effect will have any effect over there. And it doesn't seem to be. So it's really tough. But he does the work. In fact, he wanted a regular split, and I said no, and I give him something like the first $500.
Okay, for just putting on Steam for you. Interesting.
Just so I don't deal with it. I don't really want to deal with it. For me, it's a time sink, right? I don't want to chase anything. My time is about $15K a month now.
Right.
So if you break that down, 3.5, 4K. If I spend a week chasing something else that never gives me money, I've lost $4,000.
Right. So now, approaching, let's say after Clutter 15, you're going to retire. Have you planned for that moment, or
all I would do is switch it over? There's a couple things. I would hit a switch and do more. My guess is when I retire, I'll do one clutter game a year or so.
Okay, just to kind of
I'll do another
up there. And
I have 3 or 4 other games I want to do that even if they make no money, I want to get them out.
Gotcha.
Because I want to play the indie art game.
Gotcha. And how are you getting like new customers today? So I'll ask a good question here where, how are you connecting with your audience? How do you keep them invested in your product? I mean, who's doing your marketing today? Is it still just
zero marketing?
Zero marketing.
That's the nice thing is because of the distribution channels,
Right.
You know, so go to Game House right now. I am on their front page called Clutter Series. You can look halfway down.
And so, okay, so you're on front page for Game House, probably top 10 for iFish.
They have a bunch of series, and I'm one of the series. So I'm always on their front page. Go to Gamefuls, and you'll see I have 8 of my games in their hidden object front screen, and I have 8 down in puzzle.
Okay, now all right, so that goes to show you that being on the front page of your distribution channels, which is why it's so important for like Steam releases, that front page really does make a difference. It can make or break your game.
Definitely. And so Gamefuls is a more minor trickle than Game House, right? Mm-hmm. Big Fish, what happens is you're the game of the day for a day, and then you sit and hopefully you make it into the top 10. But, you know, what matters on Big Fish is I end up being their number 1 game in brain teasers, you know, and that gets me customers. But a lot of it, you know, I get a 20% conversion rate on Big Fish right now. And that's because the customers that already know about Clutter buy it immediately. And then new people, I'm sure I get 5 to 10% conversion rate from, you know, new people that's never seen my game.
Right.
And that really is what makes the difference. I don't know how to, you know, Steam has changed everything, kind of screwed over the indies, it seems, the last few years with changes they made. It's really hard to get traction there. And I've always hated what I call the pretentious indie art game, you know, playing it. But part of me wants to. I have a game, you know, called The Cube or The Test or something. And it's going to be my pretentious indie art game. And we'll see if I ever figure out how to get any press for it. By the way, I try to get Unity all the time to tell my story.
Oh, and do like I know we've talked about this in the past, the product showcase. I mean, it's just a matter of Unity wants to highlight this cutting edge 3D cinematography stuff. And I don't know. I mean, they should be. I mean, I think they should be.
But they're missing something, right? That's that's the same. I ranted the other day when somebody posted how much they liked the lecture by the Wordle guy at GDC.
Oh yeah, I know Wordle.
And I ranted and I said, you know, when is GDC ever going to get over pushing the indie win the lottery ticket myth?
Right.
You know.
Well, what's crazy is who's the other guy that everyone knows? The most popular GDC talk of he's never had a hit, but now he's got like it's almost like a franchise effect for him too. His games over time started getting. You know who I'm talking about?
You talking about Jake Burkett?
Yes, Jake Burkett. So Jake Burkett,
he's the publisher guy that does the work on Steam for me.
Okay, so he's the one doing Steam for you. So like Correct. You look at his journey, right? It's very different from yours, but he's struggled up until like he just got successful in the past like 5 years versus you got to see the benefits of this.
So he did okay. He did okay, and then Regency put him all, you know, really hit it out of the park with him. But he's now, I've been pushing him for years now to really start thinking seriously more about, you know, sequels and stuff. And he's finally doing something. So he's been up and down because of, you know, the choices. But I've known him for years. And
his GDC talk was how to be a game developer without a hit, right? It was like 10 years without a hit. Yeah, it's the second most popular.
Yeah.
Yep. Here, Chandler just posted it. I think, I think this is it. Jake Burkett. Yep, explains how to survive as an independent game developer.
Yeah, I was so jealous of him that year. By the way, I've been turned down about 5 times. My talk is, you know, how to build a sustainable business, right? That by not listening to the myths and lies.
Yeah, which is interesting. I mean, you know, it's interesting that more people aren't talking about the success you have. I think it's because, truthfully, when you look at your genre of game, people are just questioning it. You know, maybe they're like, how? Because you look at someone like the makers of Crossy Roads, right? So Crossy Roads did $1 million in 45 days using Unity ads. Unity was all over that. They pushed that out everywhere.
That's Frogger, right?
Yeah, it's like Frogger, but like voxel based.
Yeah, but it's still Frogger. It's like,
it's still Frogger.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy, but you know, you do get your moments there, right? Like you get Siege every year, which is it's like the South GDC for those who don't know. And then of course, you've had great connections all throughout Georgia and support from Georgia Game Developers Association.
Yeah, and really my distributors, it's amazing how they changed. Because 2 or 3 years ago, I actually asked, you want to do a mobile game with, you want to part, and they no. And this last Clutter I didn't mention was the first Clutter 12. It's About Time was the first collector's edition, and that's because Big Fish asked me to do a collector's edition. But 3 years ago, when I asked them, can I do a collector's edition of Clutter, they said no.
Interesting.
So the market, and by the way, that collector's edition has kept, what's an interesting story sometimes, we could talk about what kept Clutter alive during, when did I get a new trickle? One door open, this door closed, All of a sudden Big Fish sales is going down, but Game House is, it's
right.
It's been amazing the little things I used to, this little trickle isn't, performing anymore.
Right. But
I'm still staying ahead of the curve. Like this.
Do you ever have do you have any, is there any form of, so let's talk about like as a, not just a business owner, but as an indie game developer who's fully reliant on your games. Is there anxiety associated with this? Like, are you constantly checking the revenue? Like if it's down 1 month, do you have a panic attack? Like, how do you stay
what really
calm and
sucks,
collected?
So what really sucks is, January stuff, I don't get the report on it till the end of February. And then I don't get paid till the middle of March.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, so there's that lag.
Yeah.
I used to care about the stats and things, but what's funny is it's so sustainable and so like this that, I do have some anxiety between the release and seeing.
Yeah.
But it's been amazingly consistent. I'll give you an example. Because of doing the collector's edition, Big Fish threw out a thing that said 70% of your customers will buy that immediately.
Right.
Which if you do the math, since it's twice as much, that should mean you should earn 70% over time more.
Right.
And the first one, I get that first month thing, but it went out in the middle of the month. And I compare it to what did the last one do that had 3 weeks of that first one? Okay. But it was close enough. And I went, doing good. Anyways, now it's a month and a half later, 2 months, whatever. And I go, 70%. They're right on the money. Which is really nice because that 70% might turn into, let's say it's between 7 and 10 grand for me.
Mm-hmm.
Good. That gets me back up to I can picture making the 200K a year, which is my goal, sort of.
Right.
So for a while, the franchise effect was doing this and I was staying ahead of it. Now it still seems to be like this. I'm up here, which is really nice, but I'm never going to make 300,000 unless mobile hits it big,
Right.
And that's out of my hand. So for instance, for me to do really well on mobile, I think Game House has to solve their problem of how do they get more downloads. But every decision matters, right? That's one of the things I used to preach. If everything matters, nothing matters. And if nothing matters, everything matters. And I think we've talked about this before, but that's what you got to realize is that you can't sweat every freaking decision, but you want all your decisions to be good enough to keep you moving forward. And by the way, if I have a life story, it's, Clutter was good enough. That's the title of my life story. It was good enough to get to the next one, one. And now I'm really focused on this, this Clutter experience on mobile that's going to blow people away. And it'll be interesting. I think it just has to be good enough so that the conversion rate is just good enough that people will dump the funnel in, right?
Right.
That's the key thing. We know, and the nice thing is, the tricky part is this. I have 5x engagement, but people aren't looking at that. They're looking at the engagement right off, right? If they measure that, then they give up on it too soon. But Game House at least has enough notice, know now that at least there's this chunk down, it takes a while to get that chunk from the player.
Right.
Right. But if they really believe they can guarantee it, then they can put it into that quicker decision of how much do we dump in.
Gotcha.
Kind of a thing.
Right.
Even if they have to, there's a delay in my game that's not in most games because, and this has been true from day one. One of the reasons I survived early on is the all access sites. I believe I was making more than my $3 a game. So on Big Fish, they sell the game it's a $10 game. They'd sell for $7, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I get $3 of it. But on all access sites, people pay per month to play. And the more they play your games compared to everybody else, the more I get the slice of that pie.
Right.
And I believe my all access games, since they play them more like 16 hours, 20 hours, some people play them forever, right, is more than the person that's playing the 3 to 4 or 5 hour game.
Oh, interesting. So the subscription model site works way better. You're just
for a while.
Because you get the retention, right?
No, for a while. So now we're up at 12 games. What happens on a subscription site? You got a bunch of my players playing the 12 games. I'm getting a good chunk.
Right.
My game goes out and, a good chunk of each one of those stops playing the game they were playing, which was giving me money, and goes over and plays 13. Doesn't give me any more money.
Right.
My level, right? It gives me
right. I guess
you can only play one clutter game at a time.
Right,
so subscription sites were good for a while, and now I'm cannibalizing myself.
Right. You're getting the same $3 for all 12 of your games. Interesting.
Well, no, the nice thing is it's at least more than 3. The longer they play. And again, they have their own long tail. Just to give you an example, that first game, if I never did a second game, I might have made $60K from it. Mm. That first game I've made net to me $250,000. And that first clutter game still brings in $1,000 a month.
Wow. That's that's honestly, it's amazing. And you built that game 10 years ago, 11 years, 12 years ago.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So,
and it's the same game. So the biggest thing that Unity, you asked me way back, how do I make it frat, right? And it's more than Unity added movement. Unity added movement and nesting and things I could do that I couldn't do easily in my old system.
Right.
So even though, 1 was basic, 2 was dragging, 3 was blockers. What did I add next? I don't know. There's colorization. There's a bunch of stuff, right? In 8, I could do these circles that, moved around, and I had donuts, and it was great, right? It's these but I got movement, and then I explored with it more. The whole notion, not only movement, but the fact that I have, what are they called? Subroutines, basically,
right.
The fact that I can do that and it's reliable, right? Under my old system, no way you could do that. Plus it would drag it down, and I can move the entire screen, right? I couldn't do that in my old system either. So I constantly think of new things that I've done in this game. So I went from circles.
Right.
Then in the last couple of games, I did spirals that are really nice. And by the way, the spirals, not only spiral and spiral, they cross over and do some, dancing and shit. But in this last game, I put in spirals that suck down. So when you make a match, the spirals are smart enough to retract. So it's a bunch of people. It's like the old Zumba game or whatever.
Okay. Yeah.
They retract. They retract smartly. So there's that. But in this one, I added pinwheels because I wanted to do pinwheels for ages, this notion of pinwheels. And then I realized, well, if I just change the way I draw a circle, they'll work with the circle logic. So I put them in like half a day. Mm-hmm. But I have this gorgeous, thing with nine lines, really, about 10 or 11 clutter pieces. And they all, they all
flip around. Yeah.
And,
so
of course, when they're all flat, they're overlapping. So you can't see them. And beautiful. And some of them go off the screen that really frustrate people because they have to wait for them to come back in to do a match. It's just, and I think of that and play around with it enough till I go, oh, I can do that in 2 hours.
Right.
Boom. And that's what gets me, psyched. This one, you ask about new object sets. I constantly think of what haven't I given them? Well, I've given them cartoon animals in the last one. Plushies. They got there's lots of rabbits and teddy bears and stuff.
Have you thought about licensing? Like, could you do like a Marvel clutter? for
Oh,
example?
so that's my dream. Way back, I had the dream of, could I get to the right person at Disney who wouldn't screw me over sitting across from the table and
Yeah, do a
going,
Mickey Mouse version.
oh, just think if it was just all variant, just,
Yeah.
50 different poses of Mickey Mouse.
Right,
Where's
right.
Goofy? Where's Goofy as a thing? Yeah, but the problem is they would look at my and go, we can do that. And they'd be right in some ways, but they wouldn't be in other. By the way, my clutter genre is now cloned. There's a thing called shopping clutter that's already released like 14 shopping clutters. They're
Oh,
really
wow.
cheesy. They don't make as much money. I believe they bring me new customers. Occasionally I get a review from somebody who doesn't realize that my game isn't their game and then complains that
Oh, wow.
by my game.
Nice.
Yeah, it's really weird. But I know I make much. I mean, they don't even make the top. They don't make the tops, and they're not on all the sites. And they only get. They maybe get a third of my business, if that.
Right.
But they've put out 14 games in 3 or 4 years. But that's why I'm considered a subgenre now. That clutter is considered a subgenre of hidden object games. And I'm actually very proud of that. That's probably my proudest achievement that I created. It existed before me. The whole notion of a hog pile and doing what I do existed before me.
Right.
But nobody took that one core idea and then did it to death the way I've done, and built up this game that has this weird story that's all snippets driven. Nobody does non-character. It's philosophy, if anything. It's me musing about different stupid things. I mean, I don't know. I'm very proud of that too. No,
I mean,
by the way,
yeah.
80% of my customers don't do this. They turn it right off. They don't care. They just some like the quotes, some like the pretty picture, but they don't. But a few of them love it. They feel I'm playing the game with them, that it's very conversational, that I'm right there next to them talking about the levels when they play them. And
right. I mean, it's amazing, Joe. I mean, I think everyone can agree, like, what you built with clutter. I mean, it's the indie dream. It really is. Like, if I could create any game that's generating $10,000-$15,000 a month, like, I would just do that. I think all of us would.
And by the way, I started to own that I think it was Unity helped me own that.
Mm-hmm.
Until Unity, there's a movie Rounders. You know Rounders, right?
Yeah.
With Matt Damon and
yeah.
And there's a talk about grinding it out, because there's the safety way to play versus tilt, right? When you're playing poker. And how you going? Grinding it out. They're talking, I don't know if I can't remember which character says it, but they talk about that. And I was really grinding it out until Clutter 9, I think. And that's when I really started owning that I really am living I can pick and choose what I want. And I can be stupid. I still live by the thing that if I think of something and my old producers would say no, it's going in the game. I don't care.
Yeah, you don't have to answer to anyone. You have control.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. So before we kind of hop into this QA section here for everyone here,
sure.
I want to ask you about, a lot of people come to us and they want to do the indie thing, right? They want to be able to release their own indie game. You took a risk 12 years ago where you quit your job for a full year. What would be the advice today for someone who wanted to be a successful indie game developer? How do you justify potentially quitting your job to go all in on this idea you have?
It's tough. You can't as much as so what I did is not reproducible now as much. I knew I was going to get at least $100,000 from 100,000 eyeballs from Big Fish.
Mm-hmm. And how did you know that?
Because I was in the space and it was that big, and I knew if
you just knew that market, and you knew that, and you knew that they were going to accept your game at that time as well.
Correct.
So that's a big important factor there.
Yeah, and it wasn't. And man, I was annoyed because my game is not. My first games, especially, were not what I call producer friendly. So my first 2 games at Big Fish were not the game of the day. They were what they call the soft launch.
Right.
So I didn't really get the promotion, and promotion matters, but I didn't get it from them because, they felt like some of my reviews, looks like a student project. And I was kind of annoyed that I didn't, but I made it up to the 20, but it took me, I think, the third game before I was finally, they made me the game of the day instead of just the soft launch, and then after that, I started breaking into the top 10 and, getting the hot symbol and, stuff like that. Right. But so I took a mitigated risk, but I had enough money in the bank. I was only going to do it for a year, and I really did think I was going to make either 100,000, which would really pay for the effort, or, less than 10 because it would totally bomb. Yeah. But I found out enough about the market and, to warrant that second game. But nowadays, I used to tell, students, make a game, make a few games, right? Now it's find somebody that'll pay you to perfect your craft until you're ready to take your chance and your shot. And if you can, take your shot on the side instead of, quitting your job.
Right.
By the way, there's a whole talk or a whole thing that's, all my failures before Clutter, right? I spent 3.5 years from 2000 to 4 years, actually, 2000 to the beginning of 2004, where I had some funny money from being bought out by a company that I took off to write games. And the idea was I'm going to write games, get people to my website and sell really stupid Windows games like free cell. And they weren't free cell, but logic-based games that I like to play. And, I made about $200 in that 4 years and I made 9 games. And after 9 games, believe it or not, I went, if I can't get people to my website to buy my 9 games, making a 10th game might not be the smart move. But that's because I had funny money that I didn't really earn so forth, right? But before that even, I was a COBOL programmer in a shop and I saw C and I wanted to learn C. I created my first game over 2.5 years. A little partner did some stuff, but I did the main game. That game made $80. That was back in the shareware days where you shared discs and stuff.
Right.
But it got me 3 job offers. But that took 2.5 years of my life working 20 hours a day, every day. And I learned tons and I loved it. And I put everything in the kitchen sink in it. And I learned a lot about randomness, not about beauty and a few other things, right? But it failed miserably. But I didn't quit my day job to do that. I was actually working 40 hours a week for a tech company, doing an hour commute each way and still putting in 20 hours a week, doing that.
Yeah,
and
you're just really that driven and passionate. Yeah.
Find a game you want to do on the side that you really think you can do 3 hours a day with and just keep doing it and do something you like. But hey, there are exceptions. There's a guy who wrote one of the scary jumper games. I can't remember. I can look him up and give you his name later and maybe you can put it in the promote or whatever. But yeah. He wrote a game. He came from Poland, I think. His parents died, but he came over here. He talked his way into Juilliard. They wouldn't let him in because he wouldn't speak. He didn't know English yet. He spent 6 months learning English, and he went to Juilliard for music and other stuff. And then when he came out of Juilliard, he was working for somebody and decided to do a game on the side, and it was huge. Then he wrote a book. I read the book. Amazing story. But man, that guy, I think I'm a smart guy, but this is 10 times smarter than me, this guy. And obviously a hard worker and sharp. And, can you look somebody in the eye and get them to give you money? I can't. I've never been able to do that. That's a skill that some people, right, seem to have. And, write your game don't give it, don't starve to become an indie.
That's good advice right there. Don't start.
And
definitely, I always tell people, I agree with you there. I've worked for professional companies over the past 13 years, and it's always been, people, you work on your games outside of that because you have the stability, but also you just learn so much more around other senior engineers. You get all this information, and then if the challenge is just the challenge is that the market today is so saturated with games. Everyone can make a game today. It's so accessible. It's a challenge of how do you make it? We have a student who did this journey, and They literally took, I think, like a year and a half to work on their game called Crumbling World. They made a few $1,000s, but like it wasn't enough to,
Yeah.
and it was a beautiful looking game, but it's not enough to like continue that full on.
Right. We're also in a what I like to say is we're in a post-American Idol world where the story of the thing is more important than the thing itself.
Yeah.
You can make the greatest game in the world, and, you know, if your parents didn't die in a car crash when you were 7, you know, and you don't have a great story to tell of why you made that game.
Yeah, right. It's hard.
It's so hard to get traction now.
And that comes down to the starting marketing of your game early too. Right now we see it on YouTube, like YouTubers like Tyler Jonas or something. You got like who's the real MVP here? Like you got Danny, guys, who has like the most wish listed game on Steam right now. It's like 600,000 copies for his game.
Nice.
And then I'm blanking on who's the main guy. He has 3 games now out that was just from his YouTube audience. He's got like 250,000 subscribers. I'm blanking on who it is, but you know, it's kind of like you have to market your game early and get an audience. Otherwise, if you just rely, Thomas Brush, thank you. Thomas Brush is who I'm thinking of. If you just release a game and put it out there and nobody knows it exists,
how do you get seen? It's just,
how do you get seen?
And I produce, you know, again, I'm not the poster child for this because I picked a distribution channels where that didn't matter. I knew I was going to get the enough eyeballs. So.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating when you look at it today. It's harder than ever to do what you've successfully done, but I mean, people still do it. And I mean, you got companies today like the hyper casual market. You know, those companies are making billions of dollars a year off of those mobile games. Voodoo, for example, one of the largest publishers, just making tens of millions a day off their titles. So it's crazy.
It's insane. So, you know, part of me, if I could go back in time, I might have, you know, some of my heroes are people that, you know, decided, oh, well, the phone games rush. This is back, you know, 10. The smart thing to do was, you know, just keep making phone games, you know, iOS games over and over until you have enough, and you're sending all your customers to each other, you know, and you find your niche and you just build it slowly over time. You get lucky. Yeah. And there were people back then that were putting out, you know, a game a month, because that's what they were. And that's what these casual people, the hyper casual people, were discovering. And by the way, I loathe them for a different reason, right? I loathe any advertisement that is not really the game, number one.
Right.
And I also loathe those games that have some interesting ideas, and then you go in them, and it's 20 levels before they get to an interesting variation or something that makes you think. They're you know, I want some games written for me. Yeah. I don't want always the lowest common denominator. I don't want, but by the way, I do remember, you know what the most popular game back when I worked for a company called Imagination Network back in 97?
What?
You can never forget this. Slingo. Oh, Slingo was the biggest game on AOL for years. You know, bingo with bells and whistles.
Interesting.
That's it.
Slingo.
Yeah, Slingo. Still out there. Still
yeah. Very cool.
You know, whoever gets the money for that, you know, is happy. But it's not the game I want to make. I like the fact that my game, you know, half the people turn off the timer and just play it relaxed. Yeah. And then half the people treat it more like a brain teaser, trying to get really better at it, and that's awesome. Kind of a thing. But you're right. You asked the question way back. I am a mercenary. 7 years ago, I had a slide that said the best game I ever played is called the game of making money making games. And the score is in dollars. It's not in how much your friends like it. It's not in how many downloads you get. It's not in how many press clippings you get. It's, you know, dollars and cents is, you know, what. And that energized me for a while when I started thinking, you know, I'm a software engineer, and really refactoring myself, even my daily thing. How can I do this better? You know, by the way, I'm so much better at Excel this last 6 years than I used to be, because, man, I find that useful.
No, I mean, it's awesome. So no, really appreciate your time, Joe. I mean, it's always fun talking to you. And it makes me want to, did you go to GDC, by the way, this past week?
I did not. I'm still a little COVID shy.
Okay. Yeah. Same. I was like, I don't know how successful it
I'm
was
hoping
anyways.
next year.
I didn't see
and I'll apply again
there
to
anyways.
speak. I'll get my next rejection letter for him.
Okay, yeah, you're gonna submit a pitch. Good deal. Well, if there's ever anything for us to like vote on for you, let me know and I can absolutely mail it out to our community.
Sure.
So real quickly, I just want to go through fire round here, some of the questions I saw.
Yep.
And then we'll go ahead and wrap it up here.
Let's do it.
So real quickly, why did you pick the music you picked for your game? What was the feel you were trying to get?
Wow. All I did was Partners in Rhyme. It was royalty-free music.
Okay.
The first game there was Brazilian sort of South American, feel to it. So it was skewed a little bit to that. As it evolved more, I started doing a little classical, a little country. I wanted just diversity.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's much more cinematic theme. I want you to feel majestic while you're playing or really mellow. I used to just pick a random song. I now tie certain levels to certain songs that are either tranquil or pump me up or whatever. But it's still mostly royalty free. Although I had a sound guy. Some other time we could talk about him for 3 games who was phenomenal to work with and have fun with.
Very cool. So. Have you ever done or thought about a physical release of your game?
It was On Hand Software sold it through. Sold up to, I think, Clutter 7 in Walmart until that became not feasible anymore. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So
I was just getting to the point I was hoping to get. I wanted a CD that was all Clutter only.
Mm-hmm.
And I really could have that. There was a company, I think it's called Legacy, that still does that. But they wanted just a flat fee that was horrible per game, and I didn't want to give it to them.
Gotcha. Gosh, the nostalgia of going into like a Best Buy and reading like games. Like I'm thinking back to like when I bought like Age of Empires or something. Man, that's cool. That is cool. I mean, that's a dream that like I don't know if it's really obtainable today unless you're in AAA where you can just have a physical copy of your game anymore.
Yeah, I have like 7 CDs, 7 different ones that have my different games on them.
That is cool.
So
all right, very cool. The artwork for the Clutter series, is it all stock photos or do you create it yourself? Do you work with an artist?
So I worked with an artist for just one game, Clutter 6. It's the very different game.
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally the mini games I've farmed out. Occasionally I do them myself. I always quote Aristotle when I'm asked about art, and I do all the interface art myself now. Aristotle, I think, is the guy that said, if you give me a place to a fulcrum, a place to stand, and a lever, I can move the world. And that's how I feel about beveling in Paint Shop Pro, is that I am now good enough. I can do my own interface. I should show you the art, but I'm not gonna. But I found this nice orange glowing ball that is my entire buttons this time, my up arrows, down arrows, X's, because I take a nice silhouette of it. I put it on the ball. I drop it. I grab it. I surround it with black. It's just awesome. It's just, and cool. I could even do that in batch mode if I wanted to, but I don't. But it's there's nothing I can't do myself to a degree, and the rest is all stock objects of different types. So
okay, very cool. Good deal. Well, I think that is all we have, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in here. Joe, thank you so much for doing this. Always a pleasure talking with you. It's not going to be the last time we talk with you because there's always so many great things to talk about and hear how, just updates. I mean, Clutter continues to grow. And
I assume you're going to put out my email at some point on this. Anybody ever wants a free Clutter game, just like the drug dealers from the 70s.
Give you the first one.
First one's always free.
Awesome. Yeah, Joe, we'll share your LinkedIn and people can reach out to you. Also, if you're in Atlanta, guys, he runs a game developer meetup there. He's really involved in Siege, the GGDA. If you're in Georgia, make sure you connect with Joe because he's well connected. Speaking of actually well connected, I should reach out to Andrew Greenberg. I'm surprised he hasn't done one of these things with me yet. I was just talking to him.
You should.
He's doing the mentor thing.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah. Sweet. Yeah, Joe, this was awesome, man. So thank you so much.
Yeah, it was nice to do the refresh from 5 years ago.
So let me go ahead here. I'm going to end this recording here, and then we'll just hang out for a minute here.
Okay. Thanks.